Dear Skyrim, I know it's been a while since we've talked, but I just wanted to be honest about my feelings towards you. The truth is, you are by far the best looking member of the Elder Scrolls family, and I love exploring every nook and cranny of you. Every time we play, I always discover something new. Nothing makes me feel better than getting lost in your deep and dirty secrets. It doesn't matter how many times you get released into this cold and dark world, I just never get tired of you. This is my love letter to you, Skyrim. Skyrim, 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 Skyrim. You defied the odds of endless re-releases, video essayist revisionism, modern Bethesda dodginess, and let's not forget your own self-deprecating flaws to remain one of the most popular games in the contemporary video game market, almost a decade after release. It truly is one of the biggest success stories in entertainment media history, a miracle in the eyes of Todd Howard and Pete Hines. Perhaps a fluke in the eyes of Skyrim's critics. But why has Skyrim remained at the popular table with all of the cool kids for so long? In retrospect, many of the naysayers were actually right. It really hasn't aged well at all in some ways. For all of the role-playing prestige of the Elder Scrolls series, Skyrim has very little choice and consequence. The first-person melee combat? Well, the less said about that, the better.
You have committed crimes against Skyrim and her people. What say you in your defense?
In my quest for objectivity, I have lost all sense of direction in this script. This is a goddamn love letter after all. The thing is, Skyrim is like a playground from your childhood. It may not have the best swings or the coolest slides, but it gives you that warm fuzzy feeling inside whenever you think about it. And I think that feeling can resonate with a lot of people. Now, I all know where you think this is going, and yes, I do think nostalgia is a factor in my love of Skyrim, but nostalgia alone cannot be the sole reason for its continued and long-standing success amongst millions of players.
I don't claim to be the
best video game theorist in Skyrim, but I know what you're all thinking. Mods. Mods are a significant part of the reason why Skyrim is where it is today. It is undeniable that having thousands upon thousands of user-generated content will immensely increase the game's longevity. It doesn't matter what kind of player you are, there will be a mod for you. You like immersion? We got you. You like combat overhauls? We got you. You like quality of life improvements? We got you. You like Thomas the fucking Tank Engine? We got you. Yet there would be no point to any of this really if there was no platform for these mods. And I'm not talking about the engine, I'm talking about the world of Skyrim, which serves as the perfect playground for all of these different experiences to take place. And what I mean when I say the world of Skyrim, I'm talking about the world design of the game, the biomes and holds, cities and settlements, the tallest peaks and the deepest dungeons. Bethesda Game Studios made this game an absolute joy to explore, and in turn, an absolute joy to mod. See, there would be little point in modding Skyrim to oblivion if the world was boring and shallow. But because Skyrim's world is so vast and expansive, it makes it a perfect game to mod, and more importantly, a perfect game to explore. Even on subsequent playthroughs, the likelihood to stumble across a location you've never explored before is so high. In my personal experience, after hundreds upon hundreds of hours over the course of a whole decade, I came across Shadow Green Cavern for the very first time in my most recent playthrough. Exploring this tucked away sanctuary of wildlife and vegetation in the northwestern area of the map, which consequently was my least explored area of the map, was just so damn rewarding. I do really find it strange that a game that I consider to know like the back of my hand still has so many secrets left to uncover. That moment really played a great part in inspiring me to write this video. The world is arguably Skyrim's biggest selling point, and you could see they really pushed this in the marketing. And remember, this was just at the start of the open world craze that took over the forthcoming decade. It was the pace setter, the game everything was compared to. Remember hearing the journalistic headline, "Skyrim with guns, so much afterwards"? It was inescapable. Take the official trailer for example to see how they really sold the world of Skyrim. Other than the expected showcases of story, shouts and combat, there's a clear spotlight on the sweeping shots of the landscapes and cities. One particular trailer released in the lead up to the game was entirely dedicated to showing off the world of Skyrim. It's literally called The World of Skyrim. It's all about inviting potential players into an accessible but unique fantasy world. Importantly, this is a point that should be underlined. For all of the mystery and secret Skyrim teases, it is still at heart an overwhelmingly approachable place to visit. It's a given considering its popularity, right? But it simultaneously manages to carve out its own place in the Fantasy Hall of Fame. It's a feat of no accident. It was arguably one of the main objectives with Skyrim after Oblivion's world was accused of lacking personality. In a recent interview with Develop Brighton Digital 2020, our Lord and Saviour, Todd Howard, explains all.
Oblivion, after we were past it, felt it got a little watered down in the world around you. But the gameplay and the character systems, I think, were much improved over Oblivion's. And that was one of the things going into Skyrim where we want something that has a little bit of familiarity in terms of, okay, I'm not in a bizarre world, but has this epicness of a fantasy world that has a real identity. Well, we want to be authentic to the world we're in, right? So when we approach Skyrim, what feels authentic for that part of Tamriel, and not have it be all snow. That was one of our worries going in. Well, it's going to be all snow. So varying the landscape in a way. The one thing in Skyrim that we spent probably more time on, people don't maybe notice, are the Nordic ruins. How were the Nords living? What were their gods? How did they worship them? And so even though you're going to see some architecture or things like that that are familiar to you, I think when you get into the ancient Nord stuff and Alduin's Wall and these kind of things, I think we hit a really good, I'm very pleased with how that turned out, and we iterated on that a lot.
As you heard from the man himself, they really wanted Skyrim to have its own identity, and I think they were overwhelmingly successful with that particular goal. It feels just the right amount of same and just the right amount of different. I know the Lord of the Rings comparison feels redundant at this point in the fantasy genre, but there's no denying that Whiterun has a big resemblance to Edoras. The way it's built into the middle of Skyrim's flat, snowless tundra being overshadowed by distant mountains. Even Markarth gives me slight Helm's Deep vibes the way it's built into the mountainside. But Mr. Howard addressed these very concerns in the same interview.
Ultimately are based on the same, they go back to the same reference points in architecture, whether that's Scandinavian or Roman or those kind of things. But obviously some of that stuff seeps in. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, the books and the movies.
At the end of the day, I still think there is some truth to this reference point. What better way to make new players feel at home in a series that is completely new to them than to show them something very familiar early on? Especially at the time of 2011, when the Rings films were relatively fresh in people's minds, the Hobbit movies themselves were just around the corner. But as previously mentioned, despite this, Skyrim simultaneously manages to feel completely unique with its own set of original art design. The striking cities, jagged mountains, monolithic structures. Bethesda clearly knows it has plenty to show off. But they keep their cards close initially. When you gain control, the opening hours feel intentionally conventional if you follow the intended script, with little teasers of what's to come. But let's walk through it so I can really explain what I mean. Everyone remembers that first view when you come out of the cave that led you from Helgen. It's still impressive after all of these years, just an early example of the endless screenshotting potential of this game. This is that trademark Bethesda moment. You can go anywhere you want, do anything you want, be anyone you want. Skyrim doesn't exactly deliver on all of these promises, but I'd be lying if that first view didn't want me to believe in all of the endless possibilities that could happen. Probably the first things players will notice is Bleakfall's Barrow on the mountainside in the distance. The arches are almost iconic at this point, a signature piece of Nordic architecture that establishes one of the key pillars of Skyrim's exploration design. Let's call it visual exploration. At almost all times, players will be able to see something in their frame, a landmark of sorts that asks questions that Bethesda wants you to answer. What is on that mountainside? Who can I talk to in that city? What is hidden in that ruin? If it looks interesting enough, most players will want to answer these questions. Thankfully, the game's art design is nothing short of top-notch. Statues of ancient deities upon treacherous mountaintops, derelict tombs within a short stroll from big settlements, forbidden shrines just off the beaten path are all conveniently noticeable. The render distance, surprisingly impressive, means the mere presence of dragons adds to the atmosphere. You might find yourself walking along a road, taking you to your next objective, when all of a sudden, the roars are faint but recognizable. You look up to see a dragon circling around in the distance. It looks like miles away. Your naturally inquisitive video game trained brain compels you to investigate in order to aid in your search of dragon souls and gold. The game is almost teasing you at this point, like you're a fish after some bait. You just can't resist. Ultimately, this all means travelling Skyrim's world adds up to an endless cycle of getting distracted. For example, something as simple as a bandit camp like the Valheim Towers cannot be ignored when travelling east of Whiterun. The towers, almost definitely full of loot, the annoying provocative taunts from low-life enemies. I'll carve ya into pieces. You're not just gonna walk past this. Anyway, after completing Unbound, you are encouraged to join Hadvar or Ralof on the road to Riverwood to warn everyone about the dragons. Even if you're like me and you prefer to take your own time, the world still feels somewhat linear at this point. After joining up with a more substantial paved road that leads you to the river at the bottom of the valley, a strange icon will appear on your compass. Now this is an important moment because this is the first time players will notice something on their compass that isn't a quest marker. Here emerges the second pillar of Skyrim's exploration system, compass-based exploration. In this kind of exploration, an icon will appear on the player's compass at the top middle of their HUD. The icon will be somewhat faint and small at first, but as the player moves closer, it becomes larger and larger, filling with white until, BAM! That sound. A piece of text appears on your screen. Guardian Stones discovered. Here the age-old video game trick of creating a satisfying sound to associate with an action a player completes reveals itself in Skyrim. There's probably a technical term for this trick that I'm unaware of. Nonetheless, it's a trick that Skyrim is all too adept at. I mean, everyone knows what it sounds like to level up. Or to level up a skill. Simple, yet satisfying. Interestingly, a different discovery sound will play depending on the different type of location you discover. Meaning, whether you discover a Nordic ruin or a small village like Riverwood, you will hear something different.
A dragon! I saw a dragon!
What? What is it now, Mother?
This compass-based exploration is a trope that can be seen all over the open world genre today. Personally, it's not how I like to explore, but as a vehicle to drive players to new locations, it's very smart. In terms of the compass icons themselves, there are 39 in total, meaning there are at least 39 different types of locations, not including unmarked locations. These compass icons can help differentiate the types of locations and their relative importance to the player. For example, the standing stones icon tells the player that a location containing a stone with a free perk is nearby, or the dragon layer icon communicates that a dragon and a word wall containing a new shout is nearby. It all comes together as a kind of guided exploration style. On the other hand, the previously mentioned other pillar of Skyrim's exploration, the visual exploration style, is for players who prefer a more natural approach with less hand-holding getting in their way of exploring this vast province. So players have some choice in the way in which they explore this world, which is always good for a game that's biggest selling point is arguably its huge open world. And it really is huge. 8 different holds which all offer a decent variety to a setting that needs some degree of visual continuity for lore and universe reasons. The icy wastes of the Pale contrast to the dense forests of Volcrief, which feel completely different to the rolling hills of the Reach. The world of Skyrim is just big enough for players to believe these drastic changes in biome, for a game advertised to be the coldest and most mountainous Elder Scrolls location ever. But don't get me wrong, it never loses that cold and mountainous feel. The different peaks of Skyrim can always be seen in the skybox, which really isn't a skybox, because remember boys and girls, you can go there and you can climb it. It truly is a testament to the devs that the world of Skyrim simultaneously achieves both continuity and difference. The best of both worlds for a video game. It feels fantastical, yet somewhat realistic. Skyrim's numerous cities provide players with some much needed respite from the freezing temperatures and bothersome wildlife. Inside, you'll find droves of NPCs, some more annoying than others. Quest givers, vendors, standard RPG stuff. I suppose what's most interesting about Skyrim's cities is not their function, but visual appeal. Obviously ignoring Morthal and Volcrief, which I'm sure are nobody's favourites. In my opinion, Skyrim has some of the most memorable cities in all of gaming. Whiterun, which I've already previously mentioned, is perhaps the most iconic. The architectural brilliance of Yarvaska and Dragon's Reach is for all to see, and is a shining example of the excellence of the Nordic designs of Skyrim, which gives it that unique visual flair. Personally, the cream of the crop for me is Solitude. It's honestly one of the most striking pieces of visual gaming design of the last decade. The way it's built over this massive archway is just awesome. Structurally, Skyrim cities can leave more to be desired. They are all fairly similar and conventional in their layout. Most have inns, jarl longhouses, jails, traders, Hall of the Deads, maybe a marketplace in a central location. Despite this, they all feel fairly believable and alive. The NPC schedules and routines still trump that of modern day blockbusters like Cyberpunk 2077. Sneaky builds might actually have their most fun exploring the cities, looting and stealing their way through NPC houses, revealing all manner of dodgy secrets in the process. Overall, the cities are an essential part of Skyrim's world and do a great job of standing out from each other. Unfortunately, that can't be said for Skyrim's villages, which can feel hollow and unfinished. However, it does kinda make sense when comparing them to the cities. Nevertheless, they do an okay job of breaking up the expanse of Skyrim's open world. And that expanse is really what this video is all about. The expanse and vastness of Skyrim is what separates it from the rest of the open world pack. It's just so damn big. But it still manages to not feel copy and pasted completely. Don't get me wrong, out of the 71 caves, some of them will feel virtually the same, with reused textures and assets, enemies. I mean, how many tombs are just chock full of urns and Draugr? Importantly, Skyrim gets away with all of this because it does a great job of spreading them out, meaning if a player clears a cave full of bandits, it might be another 2 hours of playtime before he comes across another one. In that 2 hours, the player might come across an ancient ruin filled with Draugr, or a Stormcloak fort completely taken over by vampires. It doesn't particularly sound like much, but it goes a long way in filling out the world. The sheer variety of Skyrim's locations cannot be understated too. Let me just read off the wiki. Okay, so we got cities, towns, homesteads, Daedric shrines, standing stones, landmarks, camps, caves, clearings, docks, dragon layers, dwarven ruins, farms, forts, giant camps, groves, imperial camps, lighthouses, mines, Nordic towers, strongholds, passes, ruins, shacks, stables, ships and shipwrecks, stormcloak camps,
346 minutes later,
tombs, watchtowers, wheat mills, lumber mills, bodies of water, inns and taverns, temples, world war locations, castles, and guild headquarters. There's an undeniable variation of quality though, because there's just so many damn locations to discover. For every Embershed mine, there's an Ancestor's Glade. For every location with no story and just mindless enemies for you to kill, there'll be another one that has you piecing together a story through journals and notes that has more twists and turns than the 70s porno. But even if you delve into a dungeon with no interesting lore or quest attached to it, it's okay, because Skyrim, at its core, is essentially a fantasy looter shooter. Yeah, you heard me right. Controversially, I do think a lot of Skyrim's stories boil down to narrative set dressing for your exploration and combat. See, there will be absolutely no point to any of this exploration and world design praise if there was no reason to go and explore the world and go into these locations. Thankfully, the loot and reward system for exploring and clearing these locations is perhaps the most addictive part of Skyrim's gameplay loop. No matter how amazing the world of Skyrim is, there would be little reason to keep exploring if there was no substantial reward system for doing so. The questing and combat mechanics are nowhere near strong enough alone to keep you going. It's what brings the whole thing full circle in my opinion. Getting that next shout, or that next piece of armour that is slightly better than your own, or that unique Daedric weapon, is what keeps you travelling around the province for hours and hours. It's the excellent world design in combination with the loot system that makes Skyrim such an engrossing experience. Of course, Fallout 4 doubled down on this. It's a very controversial direction, and personally I would like them to put more of an emphasis on role-playing and story for the upcoming Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6. But it's a direction that only works because of what we've talked about. Skyrim's world is the glue which holds everything together. So far I've really talked about Skyrim's world in a more larger, more general perspective, focusing on mechanics and player experience. But to illustrate why I believe Skyrim's world is so excellent, I'm going to focus on some examples. Firstly, the Dwarven Ruins, perhaps one of the most polarizing things in all of Skyrim. From a combat perspective, they can be a slog to get through, definitely one of the most grindy areas of the game. However, their mere presence adds a unique flavour to the world. From a distance, they look like crashed alien ships that look completely out of place. Yet delving into the ruins, we find out they are ancient cities left behind by extinct dwarves. Inside, all that remains are the machines left behind by their creators. Technology that must seem extraterrestrial for the current inhabitants of Skyrim. It's damn unsettling hearing the machines churning away as you go further and further underground. And just when you think things can't get any weirder, we find out the deepest reaches of these forgotten cities are now inhabited by the demented Falmer, former snow elves, mutated by centuries of underground slavery to the point of blindness. It all adds up to nothing short of top-notch world building. Ulfand, probably the Dwarven ruin with the most player traffic, because of its placement right slap bang in the middle of Skyrim's main quest, is the tunnel to the next area of Skyrim's world I want to talk about. That of course being Blackreach. I mean man, I don't know where to start. This has to be one of the coolest areas I've ever seen in a video game. If Skyrim was a giant playground, Blackreach is the secret area of the playground, where only the older kids are allowed. An underground world full of fluorescent blue jellyfish, like Joe Rogan's DMT-influenced mind. I guess what makes this reveal so powerful is that it is in complete contrast to everything else we've seen thus far during our adventures in Skyrim. Above ground is a snowy landscape full of war and harshness. In here, peacefulness, tranquility. One of those moments where you just have to step back and look. In retrospect, I could go on and on about specific examples to show the excellence of the world of Skyrim. But I should really finish on what it means to me, not as a player or a fan, but as someone who was inspired to make this very silly video. Therefore, what Skyrim means to me is escapism, especially in times like this. Skyrim was a world I could return to and find not just distraction, but real escapism. For all of the immersion-breaking jank and gameplay that really lacks immediacy to truly occupy the mind at 100% capacity, Skyrim was a world of warmness and wonder, in a larger world of loneliness and anxiety. And I think that's what all video games should be at their best, an escape from the shittiness of current times.